Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm really excited because we're talking about one of the greatest albums ever made, one of the most impactful and influential ones, Abbey Road, released by the wonderful band The Beatles in September of 1969. The reason why I wanted to talk about Abbey Road is because if you know anything about the story of the album, it doesn't only have some of the best tracks by the band like Oh Darling, I Want You She's So Heavy, and the Abbey Road medley, but it also marks the moment where George Harrison surpassed both Lennon and McCartney as a songwriter with compositions such as Something and Here Comes the Sun, the best songs out of the album. However, the album was released more than 50 years ago now, so I think that revisiting the album and exploring the contributions that each band member made for the record gives you a slightly different perspective on how Here Comes the Sun and Something contributed to the album's legacy, at least as we see it now. So I thought it would be a good idea for a video if I revisited the album and asked the question, was he really the dominant Beatle or the best performing Beatle during the Abbey Road sessions? At first, I know the answer may seem a little obvious because, as I said before, Here Comes the Sun and Something are the best songs out of the album, but that's only when it comes to popularity and critical acclaim. When you look at the other factors that made Abbey Road such an amazing album, you'll see that John Lennon and Paul McCartney gained back the protagonism they had in previous records. Because while a track like I Want You She's So Heavy may not be as popular as a song like Something, for example, I Want You She's So Heavy is one of the most influential pieces of music made by John Lennon. It basically predicted metal music just a year prior to the first metal album ever being released, that being Black Sabbath's self-titled debut. Then you'll see the Abbey Road medley by Paul McCartney being the first time a major band used that sort of medley and put it in their album. You know, that's also a very influential part of the Abbey Road structure, and I feel like those things are often overlooked when talking about the dominant Beatle of the Abbey Road album. However, George Harrison also contributed in other ways, not only the songs he wrote for the album. For example, the use of the Moog synthesizer was completely George Harrison's idea. Sometimes it was performed by George Martin, sometimes it was performed by Paul McCartney, but the idea to include the album in the band's sound was George Harrison's doing, so I think we should also credit him for that. It's very complicated to decide which Beatle was the one that participated the most in the album and the one that contributed with the best ideas, you know, so I think it comes down to your own personal preference, which Beatle gave you the most amount of great music out of this album. For me personally, it's definitely not George Harrison, because even though Something and Here Comes the Sun, once again, I'm going to repeat it once again for you guys, are the best songs out of the album, I personally believe that the experimental nature of songs like I Want You See So Heavy, because with the vocal harmonies and Mr. Polythene Man, for example, are way more significant for John Lennon as a songwriter and, you know, for the legacy of Abbey Road, because Abbey Road is not only a great album, one of the greatest of all time, because of how pretty it sounds, because of how great each of the songs is, but also because of the way that it sounded. Back in 1969, it felt very colorful, the production was amazing, the best produced album out of the Beatles catalog. Actually, nowadays, 50 years after it was released, is still one of the best produced albums of all time. Everything sounds clear, sharp, the voices sound so beautiful and creamy. Everything regarding from the production all the way to the writing, all the way to the instrumentation feels like it fits with the aura of the album. You know, even the album cover is considered to be one of the greatest of all time. So a lot of the things that happened outside of the writing of the songs are credited to John and Paul. So even though it looks like I'm repeating the same old story, you know, John Lennon and Paul McCartney are better songwriters overall than George Harrison, it's not necessarily because of the songwriting, it's more than anything because of all the other ideas they provided for the album. For example, a song like Come Together, even though it faced a lawsuit for copying one of Chuck Berry's songs, it's still a very unique sounding song, and actually the bass line, the powerful performance, and the incredible guitar playing in the track is one of the main reasons why it's considered to be the best opening song out of any of the albums by the Beatles. Once again, the song I Want You See So Heavy predicting multiple genres of music like progressive rock, heavy rock music, and metal music, and then you go into the Abbey Road medley with songs like Because and Sun King, using a very unique form of vocal harmonies that basically makes the whole of the voices sound like one single vocal track, very similar to what Brian Wilson was doing in the album Pet Sounds and the Smile sessions. Unfortunately, during the recording of this album, John had already formed the Plastic Ono Band. He was also in a car crash with Yoko Ono, and this car crash put Yoko in bed, and instead of just staying at home, John Lennon installed a bed in the recording studio so she could be there during the recording sessions, infuriating both George and Paul. He was abusing drugs as well that often complicated the recording of certain songs, and for the most part he simply didn't participate in some of the tracks here. The most notable one would be Maxwell's Silver Hammer. He complained that Paul was only making his old granny music, how he liked to call it, and refused to work on the song, which is kind of childish and stupid. So I can't really say that John himself participated or contributed more to Abbey Road than George Harrison. When it comes to Ringo, I don't even know if I should talk about him, because it's obvious that he didn't contribute half as much as both George and John. He's only the drummer, and this is not to say that he's not a genius in his own right, because Abbey Road has a lot of different tempos, a lot of different rhythms, a lot of different ideas put into one single project. And actually, if you consider the fact that he's been responsible for the majority of the songs written by the Beatles throughout this whole psychedelic era, then you go to the blues and you go back to rock and roll and the Let It Be albums, he is a genius. He's nothing short of a genius, because he was able to add the perfect type of percussion to every single song. Especially true when it comes to Abbey Road, because the drumming in this album is incredible. Actually, he has his only drum solo in this album in the track The End, towards the middle eight of the track. And you know, there's a bunch of things that Ringo Starr does well in this album. In other words, his drumming was key for this album to be as good as it was, but that's pretty much it. You know, you do have his performance of Octopus's Garden, which is one of my favorite songs by him, but apart from that, he didn't really contribute all that much to lyricism, songwriting, or composition. That only leaves Paul McCartney, and there's quite a few things to say, because first of all, this album was his idea. He wanted to make an album like the ones they used to do back in the early years of the band, pretty much the same idea as the Get Back sessions, but this time no cameras, just the band trying to make music like they used to. And for the most part, it worked really well, because when George Harrison was asked about the recording sessions of this album, he said that for the most part it was positive, mainly because they knew it was going to be their last album. You know, I think that George Harrison was so eager to leave the Beatles, then knowing that this was going to be the last project made him really happy, which is the reason why they managed to work through this album with little to no tension in the recording sessions. Other than the fact that this song was basically Paul McCartney's idea, you also have songs like Maxwell's Silver Hammer, Oh Darling, The End, You Never Give Me Your Money, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Golden Slumber, some of the most beautiful, epic, and best performances that Paul McCartney ever delivered on a Beatles album. You do have a bunch of amazing compositions where he participated in, maybe not directly, but with a bunch of ideas. For example, the track Come Together, which Paul McCartney, even John Lennon admitted that he had a lot to do, not with the writing of the lyrics, but with the composition of the song, how it was going to sound. You know, only the bass line is enough to give him quite a bit of credit, because it's the main catch of the song. Then you have the backing vocals in the track Something, which I couldn't imagine the track without him. You have his help with the arrangement of the vocals in the track because it was really complicated to arrange the vocals so tight together so it sounds like one single voice, as I said before, and Paul McCartney had a lot to do with the production, along with George Martin, obviously. And of course, you have the entirety of the Abbey Road medley being Paul McCartney's idea. John was not all that happy with this idea. Actually, John was acting like a fucking idiot throughout this entire album. He wanted his songs to be on the first half of the album, and then Paul's songs on the other half, and maybe George Harrison's, you know, in between those two, I don't know, but he didn't really wanted the album to sound as tight and as cohesive as it actually ended up sounding. So if Abbey Road would have been left for John Lennon to decide how it was going to sound, we would have a totally different album. So because Paul McCartney was leading the album, not only in terms of composition and writing, but also in terms of the structure of the album and the production, George Martin has said multiple times that he helped him a lot during the whole, you know, mixing of this album, is that we have the album we have today. Of course, this is a really silly and kind of stupid way to see things, because all four Beatles collaborated to the creation of Abbey Road. If you take one of them out, then the whole album falls apart. That's definitely true, but I feel like when people say that George Harrison was the dominant Beatle, or the one with the best songs in the record, or the biggest contributor, I feel like they're ignoring a really big part of what Abbey Road actually is. They see a track like Something and Here Comes the Sun and say, you know, this is the best song out of the album, so he's the best Beatle in this album, right? But not really. If you want to say that, for example, in an album like Rubber Soul, George Harrison was the dominant Beatle, I would say that you have a really good point, because the guitar playing on that album is a really big part of the reason why the album was so successful. And also you have songs like Think for Yourself, If I Needed Someone. But when talking about Abbey Road, I feel like, Paul McCartney's all over the place, either in the production, the mixing of the album, the use of the Moog synthesizer, the bass lines, and obviously the backing vocals too. I personally believe that people just like this narrative of George Harrison being a misinterpreted genius all too much, because if that were to be the case, if we believe that George Harrison was secretly the best songwriter out of the Beatles' discography, then how can you explain that his whole discography was so mild? All Things Must Pass and Living in the Material World are great albums, and Cloud 9 is also a really good album, but every other project in between is from bad to mediocre to maybe a little good. Nothing comes close to albums like Ben on the Run, Ram, Plastic Ono Band, Imagine, Double Fantasy. It's simply no comparison. Paul McCartney and John Lennon have always been better songwriters overall. And I think that when you tell people, that George Harrison was the star of Abbey Road, and then they listen to the album, you see that he's singing in 2 tracks and then he's nowhere to be seen, you tend to mislead people into thinking that Abbey Road was less than what it actually is. It's one of the most influential albums ever made, one of the greatest pieces of music ever released, and the main reason for that, at least in my opinion, is the Lennon-McCartney duo, especially McCartney constantly putting out music, constantly putting out ideas, not only for the songs, but for the structure, for the production, and so on and so forth. I know it's kind of unnecessary to say this sort of things because the Beatles were a band, so saying, oh, this one was better than this one is kind of useless. We should just be thankful that the band created Abbey Road. It doesn't really matter who wrote the most songs or who gave the most ideas. I definitely agree with that mentality, but I've seen this narrative being thrown around a lot on places like Reddit, Rate Your Music, an amazing music page, and also Twitter, and I felt like it was an interesting idea for a video. I want to know your opinion though, because it's definitely a topic where I've been called out before as being a Paul McCartney glazer, as being biased as to the Lennon-McCartney duo, not really having a neutral opinion. So I want to see what you guys think. Do you think that George Harrison actually surpassed Lennon and McCartney in the album Abbey Road, or do you think that people are exaggerating the whole story a little bit too much? Let me know in the comments and I'll make sure to read it and give you my opinion on your opinion, so we can have a small conversation in the comment section. I truly hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. Also, if you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, album, or artist, you can leave it down below and I'll make sure to read it and fulfill your request as soon as I can. Once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.